Hello, this is Anna here and thanks for clicking on this video. In this video, I want to give tips on how to get a H1 in business. I also got a H1 in business, so I thought why not help other people by giving tips and advice on what worked for me. Before we jump into this video, please subscribe. My goal is to get 100 subscribers before the end of the summer. I like making goals, so I thought why not make a goal for my YouTube channel. And if you have any comments or any suggestions for next video, please comment them down below. I do read every comment because I don't get that many comments. The video is going to be structured just like my other 3 videos for physics, chemistry, and biology. I'm going to give some of my background, then I'm going to give some tips, and then I will give at the end there will be some conclusions or like my overall thoughts. So my background in business, in Leaving Cert, I was exempted from Irish, so I want to do at least 7 subjects because I didn't want to be reliant on only 6 subjects. So I did business as an extra subject when I was doing the Leaving Cert the first time. And honestly, it was very hard to do it as an extra subject because you don't have a school to give you structure, you don't have a teacher to tell you every single thing or like to tell you what you're doing wrong or to even motivate you. And I found it very hard to keep up with business. So when I was repeating, I made sure I had a teacher for business and I was doing it in school. And that personally really helped me. And when I repeated, I got a H1. So I improved from a H3 to a H1, which I think is a reasonable improvement. I was personally really happy with it because that's 100 points in my bag. If you see me looking down, that's because all of my notes are like I wrote all the notes for what I'm gonna say on my pad, so sorry. So business is like biology when it comes to the overall approach to it, and it is not like chemistry or physics or even maths. So if you are doing biology, you will find that a lot of the approach to business is kind of similar to biology. It's not at all like 100% similar. There are big differences, but unlike chemistry and physics and maths, there aren't many concepts to learn. It's mostly just facts or getting familiar with the situation. So understanding will be easy, but learning will be harder because you have to learn so much facts. You have to learn a lot of things. That will be where the biggest trouble for business comes. Tip number 1 is make notes. For business, it will be very beneficial to you to make notes. The reason why I'm saying that is if you ever see a business book, it's this thick, it's huge. You're not gonna need all of that information. You would need to go through all of that book to be able to pick through the most important things you need for the exam. Thankfully, what you need for the exam is very concise and precise, and it's not as much as in the book. Personally, my teacher had really good notes, so that helped me. So I didn't have to spend time making notes. I used that time to do my exam questions. If your teacher's notes are not that good, or if she's not giving them or he's not giving them, I will recommend you yourself to make notes. Tip number 2, for business, I recommend the way to make notes is to read through the book, then summarize each and every chapter with the most important things that are needed in that chapter, like the keywords, and using that make your notes. An example will be, if you go through the first few chapters, you realize that some important aspects from those chapters are how to terminate a contract, what are the elements of a contract, how to make a contract. Those are important, so you make notes for them. So if you go through each and every chapter, you realize the most important bits and points, and you make notes through them. They are precise in the sense that you're not waffling your way through. You're not writing chunks and chunks of useless information. Every word in those notes is useful. I will also recommend leaving spaces in your notes, which then you can come back and fill them with additional information or information that you found going through the exam questions that are not in the chapters that you can then add in your notes. So when you are learning for an exam, you have everything in those notes. Tip number 3, if you're familiar with my channel and my brand, oh, that's cringy. Anyway, if you're familiar with me, you know that I will hammer down the point of doing exam questions down your throat. Like, I'm a firm believer, and even research shows this, that the people who are getting top grades are not Einsteins or like Newtons. They're not like vastly intelligent than me. They're just smart when it comes to their studying. They're not wasting their time doing passive study. They are doing exam questions. For business, again, just like every other subject, please do exam questions early and as you're going along, and as many as you can. Because again, why do you need to do them early? Because then you will have them done before the exam comes, before your leaving cert comes, as you're going along, because then you will know what is needed in the chapter and what's not needed in the chapter. And as many as you can, because practice as much as you can. Tip number 4 is again relating to exam technique. Business, if you don't have an exam technique for a business exam, your grade is gonna suffer. And that's not because you don't know your content, that's just because you're not approaching the exam correctly. The way I will recommend and I will give advice on to approach the exam is please read the exam questions carefully. It is so easy to miss a point as you're going along because majority of business is an essay-based exam. You might just forget about what is a part of a question as you're writing a long answer. After you've read through each and every question, I recommend you give 5 to 10 minutes. I know that is a lot of time, but it will help you to give 5 to 10 minutes before you start the exam to make a plan for each and every question, so then you can pick a best question that you know. Business has a lot of options, but you might end up picking a wrong question thinking you know it really well, but halfway through the question you're like, I don't know the part C of this question. But time is lost, and from my experience it's hard to do extra long questions. So you only have kind of one chance at doing the right question. I really recommend to avoid this problem or to eliminate this problem is before you start the exam, read through questions really well, and then using a rough sheet of paper, make a small plan for each and every question. So what I mean by that plan is literally write down the bullet points you know, like a really rough idea of what you know through in that question. So for example, if you're doing a question 1 and it's A and B is all about contracts and everything related to them, and you think, oh my god, I know this question, so you start doing them, but question C is about dismissal and what is unfair and fair dismissal. By the time you're on C, you're like, oh my god, I have no clue what this is. But if you had made a plan and kind of wrote a rough draft of what you know in question 1, you would have known you don't know the question 1 very well, so you could have avoided this problem. Tip number 5, and this is gonna be now how to answer the exam. If they're talking about evaluate a thing or illustrate a thing or describe a thing or explain a thing, these words have a value to them. They mean something. So before you answer the question, you need to first understand what the question is asking, because if it's asking evaluate, you need to then give your own opinion on how well, for example, this company is in its management. And if it's asking about illustration, then you need to give them examples. For example, if you're talking about international trade and talking about embargoes or tariffs or trade blocks, and they're asking to illustrate these terms, then you will need to give example for each and every single one of them. Because majority of business exam is essays, please don't write paragraphs upon paragraphs of a sea of words. You can't read that, the examiners can't read that, nobody can read that. Like, let's just imagine your examiner is having the worst time of the day, the worst time of their life. It's middle of the night and they've been correcting exams since morning. They are on their 5th cup of coffee and they really want to sleep, and they know they're not getting enough money for this torture. I'm just kidding. They are presented for their exam, and you have written literally 5 pages of a story that's really, really bad. It's not gonna be in your favor. I know it's kind of unfair to think about, oh my god, they should judge me about the information I'm giving, not how they're feeling or how pretty it is. But let's just be honest about it and think of it in terms of humans. The other person, the examiner, is a human, and no matter how fair a human is, we all have our judgments and biases. Make it easy to eliminate as many judgments and as many biases as we can, and make it really, really easy for the examiner to correct our exam. So please avoid writing huge paragraphs, bullet point everything. I want to see underline stuff, make your definitions different color, make your links different color. I know that it's going to be hard to change pens, but make it easy for them to understand. If you are doing ABQ and you need to put the link, I made my link in a different color. I used the black pen. I use black pen for the link and I use blue pen for like the other information. So it's so easy for them to correct my exam and not think of it as like tip number 6. No, that's tip number 6. Yeah, I don't know my maths, sorry. That dreaded ABQ apparently. Like I found ABQ really fun and very nice. It's not as bad as people think it is. It's so doable. Just treat it as every other question, because the trend is coming up in the other questions that they are also including short prompts and short examples and making other like the long questions also kind of like a mini ABQ. But the basic premise is they want you to apply your knowledge. They want you to apply your business knowledge. And if you understand your stuff well and learn it well, it won't be hard for you to apply that. So the way I will approach it is I will read the questions first so I know what they're asking. Then I will read the paragraph, and as I'm going along, I will highlight or underline or whatever you want to use the parts of that paragraph that is relevant to the question. So I already know before answering the question, these are my links. And then when I'm answering the question, I'm always keeping the prompt or the passage in my mind and always referring back to it. Every point I write, I then link it back. And that's why it's so important to make the link as prominent as possible. Literally like, there's the link, like literally diverting all the examiner's attention to the link so that they know you know your stuff. And that's pretty much it. Every year the chapters for the ABQ change, and whatever chapters are for whatever 3 chapters are for your year, just focus on them really, really well, because focusing on them will also ensure that you are actually doing the long questions, the 3 of them, really well. So you are literally like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not that I recommend that, but you know. Tip number 7, be aware of the world around you, especially in business. Read as many newspapers as you can. Read as many business columns as you can. One of the tips my teacher gave us to have a news app in our phone. Always, you know, if you're on the bus or you know you're walking to school, and just go to the business section of the news and just be aware of what's happening in the business world right now, because just being like aware of it will help you give relevant examples and will help you know, because usually the business exam is around like what is happening in the world right now, and that will make you be up to date. Tip number 8, give examples everywhere. That's where reading newspapers and having a news app is really helpful, because it's going to give you relevant and new examples to give in your exam. Even if it's a question that is not asking for examples, just give them, you know, just make it easy for them. Tip number 9, yeah, just go with it. Tip number 9 is time yourself. Business exam is very time limited. I am someone who really likes doing extra questions just for the sake of doing extra questions, but I do extra questions in the exam if there's time. And I found that I could not do it in business exam, and I could only finish properly the questions that were required. And that shows you that you don't have to do extra questions to get a H1. What I mean is that, you know, do the questions that are required really well, and then if you have time, do extra questions. In business, it was very hard for me to do it, so I didn't bother. And that showed me that the time was really limited. And the way I made sure that I did all my questions on time was I will practice doing exam questions under time conditions. So for business, please make a habit of doing once in a while, doing a whole exam question or doing that one particular question under time conditions. Make a habit of doing that, because that will help you learn how to write faster, find where your weaknesses are, and will help you manage your time better. Tip number 10, yay, marking scheme. Marking scheme for business is really helpful, but sometimes they have like long answers because they have sample answers. So what's in the marking scheme for sample answers does not mean it's the only thing. It's one of the right answers. Just keep it in mind that when you are looking at the marking scheme, the answers are not the only answers. Sometimes I will go to the marking scheme relevant to that topic and go to the sample answers and find some good examples or some good points and then write them in my notes, because that will make sure that I'm keeping myself up to the examiner's standard and up to the marking scheme standard, I guess. Yeah. Tip number 11, how do I do that? Tip number 11, yeah. Tip number 11 is memorization. Business requires a lot of memorization because there's a lot of information and you need to learn that information. Obviously, you need to understand that information, but understanding a definition is not going to help you write that definition in the exam. You will have to learn those underlined terms or those specific words that are required in the exam. So what helped me for memorization was 3 things. Active recall, teaching it to someone, and examining myself. active recall is really powerful technique that will help you in every subject. It can be used in anything, and that is to, if you learn something, go back and force yourself to recall it from your memory, and that will help your brain and you know what your weaknesses are and will help you build long-term memory. There's also this thing called the curve of forgetfulness. I mean, there's a lot of research done on it, but the basic point is to go do a topic 24 hours and then do it 2 days later again, then do it a week later, and then do it a month later again, and then do it 2 months later. By forcing yourself to recall in this timeline, you are making sure your brain is not forgetting that information, and you are making that information go into your long-term memory from your short-term memory. Also, teaching it to someone else is a really good way of learning. It's the best way to force yourself to understand things really well. And the third one is examining. By forcing yourself to do an exam or a test, tests and exams are a form of active recall, and they will really help then bring your information into long-term memory. These are my tips for business. I really think business is very possible to get a H1 in business or a H2 or whatever grade you want. If you are searching for videos like this or topics like this, that means you have the drive or you have the initiative to want a good grade. And that's just one of the steps. And now the second step will be to apply those things in real life, because this video is there to help you, to give you guidelines, and then what is needed and what's going to help you the most is actually applying these things in your real life, and that will be the best way to get a H1 in business. So yeah, I hope you have fun with it, and I hope these tips help you and will help you get the grade you want. And if you have any other video suggestions, comment down below, and if you're new here, please subscribe because that will really help me. And if you want to follow my Instagram, do follow my Instagram. I'm trying to post more, and you can connect with me directly there if you have any other ways of wanting to talk to me. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.
Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood.